Good morning, and today we are going to talk about English teaching opportunities in international schools and what English teachers have to learn so that they can do well in international schools, where the qualifications of IB and the Cambridge qualifications are offered. And I am Dr. Ramakrishna Aduri. And let's see what best can be done today. And all the English teachers who are teaching in other schools like CBSE and state boards, ICSE and all should learn so that they can get into international schools and start teaching English there. And for any teachers professional development, there are three areas, of course, which are very, very important. And the first of them is the domain knowledge. This I call it a subject knowledge. All the English teachers should have the necessary subject knowledge. It can be literature, it can be about the language, it can be the syntax of the language, it can be anything. The subject knowledge is essential. And the second and the more important one is the delivery mechanism. How do you transfer the knowledge? How do you build the skills in the students? And this is even more important than the subject knowledge. The delivery mechanism, you call it the teaching methodology. And the third one, of course, is a technology integration. And to become a contemporary teacher, it's all the more essential for you to use the technology these days, like listening games, mixer groups, news reading, phonetics, and textualizers, and so on. And therefore, anybody who wants to, establish themselves or, himself or herself as a good English teacher shall necessarily have all these three characteristics, like, domain knowledge and having good delivery mechanism and the technology integration. All the three are equally important. And the next point I want to tell you is that if you want to refine your English, you should read ardently and you should be able to write avidly and listen conscientiously, and finally you must speak fluently. Only when you have all the four skills very emphatically, strong, then you can be a good English teacher. You say you must be a good reader, you must be a writer, and you should be able to have, you should be able to listen and comprehend properly, and finally you should speak fluently, like good English, fluent English with the right accent. And these are the skills, of course, an English teacher shall necessarily have. This one, like, then you have to embellish your language, ornate your language, decorate your language so that you can turn yourself into classy and upmarket. There are many teachers, of course, who teach English as a second language, but they should ornate the language, with the rich vocabulary, like good, like epigrammatic sentence construction. So if you want to teach in an international school, it is essential for you to use good vocabulary, like you should have rich vocabulary with you so that you can write well and speak well. Then the next point I want to tell you, a good English teacher is one, of course, who never explains, and this is the most important, which is rather different to understand. You never explain a prose lesson or any poetry lesson to students. The question obviously comes, what should I do? You must build the skills and make the students understand on their own. I repeat my point, they should read the lesson, it's a prose lesson, or it is a poem, and they should understand it on their own. They can have their own perspectives. And when the writer is giving a presentation, a literary work, students can understand in different ways. They can have their own perspectives. And therefore, the point is, a teacher's role should be marginal. And when the writer is presenting it to the students, and there is no role for the teacher to interfere and interpret that in his or her own style, not necessary. It should be left to the students and that is very, very important. Therefore, as a teacher is, like in an international school, very predominantly the one, of course, who builds the skills and leaves it to the students to understand and form their own perspectives. That's the most important one. So if he explains or if she explains, what happens? Students will never learn to understand on their own. Okay, if the teacher is there to explain, of course, it is teacher's way of understanding that can be imposed on the students. Students can understand it differently and form their own perspectives and probably develop a passion for the writer so that they can read the other works. Okay, it's not necessary for them to stop at that level and all that. They also can think of the other works of the writer so that they can appreciate the writer there. Now see, if teacher starts explaining, the problem that we normally see is that children, they never learn to appreciate because they didn't learn from the writer, they learned from another teacher who has interpreted that. So it is only a second hand information we have, and the teacher can be prejudiced, the teacher may have preconceived notions, the teacher may have her own shadow coming there, and therefore students should read and they should have the first hand experience. So teacher's job is limited to build the skills. That's very, very important. I underline this point. You teach the syntax, you teach vocabulary, you teach the pronunciation, anything you can do that, and but you can't think of explaining. So the one thing that is done least by a teacher of English is explaining. Okay, so she can read and she can make the students listen, and she can read with an expression. All these things can be done except that explaining the things. So teachers should allow the students to interact with the writer. Okay, that is a first-hand communication, and that's an environment you have created, a first-hand environment, and therefore teachers should not interfere much there, and the writer and the students' communication, which is a very, very important one, of course, there. Then it's least solicited. As I have told you, the interference of the teacher, the interpretation is the least solicited. And see, the most important point, of course, particularly for those who want to enter this arena, teaching in an international school, they should know how many words they know, they are familiar with. This is very, very important. Unless your vocabulary count is reasonably good, you can't communicate there, because when you read different kinds of texts, when you come across different kinds of words, your reading comprehension must be reasonably good, and therefore an international teacher is all the time someone, of course, who is building the vocabulary. Whenever you come across a word, you just write it down, learn the pronunciation, learn the spelling, learn the meaning of that in the particular context, and also learn how to use that there. And therefore a teacher who is expecting to teach in an international school all the time shall improve the vocabulary, and she or he should have rich vocabulary, and she should be able to understand without referring to the dictionary. And therefore the rich vocabulary part is a very, very important one. A conservative estimate all the time we see generally in the teaching community is that a student who has completed his grade 10 should know about 1500 words, and a graduate should know, whatever be the discipline, of course, they are they should know about 3000 words. So if that is the case, an English teacher, particularly teaching in an English environment, should be rich in vocabulary. I don't know if I can say even 5000 words. They must be familiar with at least 5000 words to be there. And so that's not the only one. Even when she or he speaks, of course, the sentence must be complex in nature. So the complexity of the sentence and rich vocabulary, and these are the focal points for anybody who wants to teach in an international school. Rich vocabulary and the complexity of the sentence, these are very, very important. And in international schools, when students write something, present an essay, and most often it is the written assignments, and how is it valued by teachers? This is a very, very important one. And I just tell you, any written work, of course, you have, when it comes for your perusal, what perhaps you do is that the first and foremost point, you look at the text. I mean, when you look at the text, you are looking at the ideas. How are the ideas of the student? That's the most important one. That carries, it's paramount rather. So the first one is a text, means ideas. The second one is you see the sentence, the complexity of the sentence. As they are growing and learning an English language, it is imperative that expectation is that the sentence structure must be complex. Instead of just say a simple sentence, the sentence is complex in nature. It is epigrammatic. And the third one, whenever students are writing, you should see the purpose. What for are they writing? The writer shall have a purpose, and the purpose should not be defeated. And therefore, when you read, you should understand the purpose of that. That's the most important one, the objective of writing. And the fourth one, of course, I need not tell you, it's the audience. For whom is it meant for? For whom is he writing? Is he writing for an examination? Is he writing for a newspaper, or is he writing for a competition in the examination? I mean, in the school, whatsoever it is like. And therefore, audience. So all the 4 points are very, very important for a teacher of English. You should be able to assess the child's performance on these 4 parameters. And therefore, having learnt that you should see these things, these 4 things, text, sentence, purpose, and audience, you should be able to design a rubric in such a way that you assess them, of course, perhaps in a most consistent way. My point is very, very clear. If a student normally in Cambridge examinations, if a student is supposed to get 8 on 15, even if the paper goes to 100 different countries, it is still the same 8 on 15. So that kind of rubric, it should be a rigid frame, and that must be made so that when you assess the students and everything is completely assessed as it should be done. Then when people are speaking, when the teacher is speaking, or you have to, build this speaking skills, what is that you are watching in the students when, as a teacher of English? So first you see the choice of appropriate words. When they're speaking or when they're writing also, of course, how are they picking up the words? Means, can they retrieve the appropriate words from their repertoire and just use the words there? Means, what is the choice of the words? You know so much about a child's values and attitudes when you look at the words they are using. So this is number one, choice of words. And the second one, you are seeing how are they constructing the sentence? Is it grammatically correct, or are they following the syntax and all? So this is the second point we are very keen about. And the third thing is that how good is the command on the language? Every student who is writing something or speaking, in some context, we see how is the command on the syntax of the language. Is he grammatically correct, or his sentence construction has got some flaw or whatever it is? It should be really a flawless construction of sentence. And the third one, the fourth one is, how is his knowledge? His knowledge should be compendious, a comprehensive knowledge on all aspects. He should have his facts and figures correct. So everything that reflects on my paper, or when I listen to him, he should have a compendious knowledge, and there must be a manifestation of that. There is a demonstration of that compendious knowledge, a comprehensive knowledge the student has got. And the next point I want to mention here is that, as a teacher, it is important for you to have the exactness, the correctness of certain words what you're using. Okay, you can't use the words you like. Say for example, when you're using a word like, say some words like figure, diagram, image, picture, illustration. So there is a subtle difference between them. You can't say use picture for an image or a figure for a diagram or something like that. And therefore, as a teacher, you should be very, very careful when you're using your words. Each word is different. Okay, whether you use figure or a diagram or an illustration or a picture. And so that's the clarity you require. And similarly, when you have, like attainment, students have attained one level from another level and all that, accomplishment, achievement. So you can't use another word as a substitute when a particular word has to be used. There is a lot of terminology. Actually, there are about 300 words which are commonly used by teachers in international schools. So you must be very careful whether you are using the right word or not. Okay, so the second point I have given you is attainment, accomplishment and achievement. Then even look at the papers you are seeing. We call them scripts actually. Are you correcting or marking or grading or checking? So you should use the right word. I repeat my 4 words there: correcting, marking, grading and checking. So these words are very, very context specific, and therefore as a teacher you are expected to use the correct word there. You can't just say replace one word by another word and all that. And similarly, you should know the difference between a simple assessment and evaluation. When you say evaluation, there must be a judgment, otherwise it's only an assessment. So you should be very, very careful when you're using the words. Is it assessment or is it evaluation? What is that you are doing? Okay, so is it the norm based one or a criterion based one? You should know that when you're doing an assessment actually, like. So principles of evaluation is different, and marking scheme is different, and rubric is different. And therefore, I just want to tell you, like, when you're using the terminology pertaining to that academic environment, you must, each of them, the terms you're using has got a specific connotation, a specific meaning based on the context. So you should get acquainted with that. So you can't take it easy and use some word and all that. So it's a norm referencing or criterion referencing. You should know it. And many times it so happens that there is a documentation. There is a documentation of the progress or achievement of the child. You use several descriptors. And therefore, when you are documenting, of course, the right terminology is demanded. Whether you are reporting to the management or sharing your reports with the parents and all, the right terminology has to go. And it takes time for you to get acquainted with such terminology. It is not easy that overnight you get everything and all that, but you also learn how to use the vocabulary in day-to-day contexts actually. And the next and the foremost, the most important one rather, is when you prepare your lesson plan, you also have to think of incorporating the differentiation strategies. You don't teach the same way all the students, because different students, they're endowed with the different kinds of intelligences. And we Howard Gardner's theory, multiple intelligence theory. So you identify the intelligence of the child, and based on that, of course, you just have your plan drawn, lesson plan drawn. So you write your objectives based on that. You conduct your activities based on that, the intelligences they are endowed with. Okay, and you also know as a teacher their dominant intelligence and also the recessive intelligence. Where are they strong and where are they weak? And based on that, you design your activities. This is number one. And you also should know about the background of the students. Based on that, you design your assessments and your assignments. Okay, your knowing, measuring, of course, how much they have learned is based on their background. So you study the students, you document about them and their learning styles, their intelligence endowed with, their nature, their likes, dislikes. So there is a complete prehistory of every student available with you, and based on that you are deploying your differentiation strategies. This is a very, very important one. So how different is your teaching? Have you incorporated a conglomerate of strategies, taking care of all the students, addressing their needs, catering to their requirements and all that, and therefore why children learn a particular lesson may not have the same objective also, therefore you have to address the needs of every student, and this is should be reflecting in the differentiation strategies. A good teacher is one, of course, who can accommodate various kinds of differentiation strategies. Okay, a teacher, a seasoned teacher, an experienced teacher is all the time one, of course, who can make her teaching instruction totally diverse based on the students, and that shows the experience actually. It's not that one size fits all. It doesn't work out. It is not, say, any other board. It's an international board where each student who is enrolling, there must be justification for his academic needs. Then once you identify the intelligence of the student, in accordance with that, of course, you design your lesson plan and activities based on that intelligence. I'll give you one example for that. Suppose you find a few students who have got that interpersonal intelligence, they're comfortable with other children. Okay, in such a case, what I do is that I make them the leaders. I make them where they have to interact with other students and do some work and all, and therefore I am using the intelligence of those students, okay, in a specific context where I need it. Say for example, there are some students who have got linguistic intelligence, their language is good. So if I have to write something, of course, in the class, if someone has to write volunteer, I know whom I have to pick up. So because their language is reasonably good, their linguistic skills, they come to the fore, of course, I have documented. So I use them for writing something. If I have to narrate something, prepare a discourse, what exactly I do is that I pick up someone who has got that, okay, the linguistic skills. So this is how I plan my lesson in such a way. I take care of their intelligence, and not only I'm familiar with that, I also want to nurture that one. That intelligence, I want to see that there is a progress in that. Of course, there is enough of work to nurture that. Then you, as a teacher of an international school, I expect you, Dr. Howard Gardner used the word intelligence. He did not use, say, merit or talent. So you should know, of course, when do you say a student is brilliant, when do you say he's clever, when do you say he's intelligent, and he has got talent, he has got merit, and these words are very, very different. And you can't say that, okay, he is good. Good doesn't mean anything there. So you should say in what way is it good. So you must be specific. Is he intelligent, or a brilliant, or a clever, or a genius, or talented, or is a meritorious? And these words must be very, very specifically used, particularly as an English teacher. You can't, okay. And now also I want to tell you, you should be able to, as a teacher, able to know the intelligent quotient of the student. Okay, IQ rating should be done, of course. You maybe with the help of the counselor, or maybe on your own, you should be able to conduct these psychometric tests, of course. And once you administer the psychometric test, you should be able to identify the students who are profoundly gifted. When the IQ rating is reasonably large, of course, than the normal, the students are classified, and there is a category, we call them profoundly gifted. And you should be able to address the needs of such students, of course, who are profoundly gifted, exceptionally gifted. So your lesson plan is taking care of the exceptionally gifted students, and on the other side, of course, who have got some learning disabilities. It can be any kind of syndrome, but the student is in your class. So your lesson plan should also have some kind of, provision for addressing the needs of such students, of course, who have got subnormal intelligence, and then you should know about the language skills, okay, and learned by a student, like whether the student is precisely, you should be able to assess. So I just want to ask you a question. You want to be a teacher in an international school, and how do you assess the reading skills? How do you assess the listening comprehension of the student? How do you assess the reading comprehension of the student? How good is he in reading and understanding? Of course, how good is he in writing? So there must be, like some rubrics with you, some parameters defined, so that you can specifically tell, of course, how good is he in these skills, has he honed the skills or not. And therefore, this is a general question for you. So when someone is in front of you, of course, what kind of assessment do you use so that you can check whether his listening skills are good and or speaking skills are good or not? And like, you should be able to specifically measure it. It's not that just good. Okay, good has no definition actually. Okay, good is subjective in nature, it's a relative. But I want you to be very objectively, you should be able to assess all these skills, language skills. Then as an English teacher, is all the time important for, see, where is the product? Okay, the students are learning the language. So we all know that. When the students are learning the language, are they able to apply the language they have learned and get a product, the learning outcome? So that is important actually. Like generally when we say project-based learning, it is the application of the language they have learned. And an activity is used for the learning purpose. We all know that, of course, it's used in the classroom, of course. And but a project is different, and project is an application. And therefore, we give projects to the students time and again, and we want to understand, of course, whether he can apply the the knowledge he has gained and the skills he has honed and all that, whether they are applicable or not. Okay, so this is another one, project-based learning. And my point earlier is that, can you measure the skills of the students very precisely, and what methods do you deploy for that? And you must be familiar. As a teacher of English, of course, it's all the more important for you, of course. If you can't measure, so you can't chalk out a plan for that. Okay, if you can't measure, so where is your plan? You can't be meticulous, of course. So when you are planning, so what is essential is that a plan should be meticulous, it should be flawlessly executed, and sometimes, of course, you have to analyze it very critically, and finally you have to evaluate the program, of course, how good you have delivered it. Evaluation is all the time making a judgment. So when you complete the program, you after doing some modules or anything like program sessions, everything, at the end of it, of course, you have an objective evaluation of your own program, whether you have done justice for that what you have written, and you have to revisit the objectives you have written and make sure that you have achieved those objectives. It's not for submission to the management that, okay, you have written n number of objectives. So you have to revisit the objectives and ensure that you have achieved those objectives. Without ascertaining that, of course, there's some point in going ahead. And therefore, what is essential is that you have to revisit the objectives, check the objectives. That is the purpose of writing the lesson plan and ensuring that you have achieved the objectives. Otherwise, it's meaningless. Okay, then see, there are some incompetent teachers all the time. Of course, you can't have near perfection in any of the institutions. When you have incompetent teachers, they focus only on remembering and understanding. Unfortunately, these two are the lower order thinking skills. They do not serve any purpose. If a student can memorize and just understand and present it in the examination and get good marks and all that, that doesn't make any sense, particularly in an international environment. Of course, you should think of higher order thinking skills. If you can understand Benjamin Bloom's revised taxonomy, the top four, all the time we talk about applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. So the top four should be given more importance than the bottom two. Bottom two, of course, remembering and understanding. These are, I don't say inconsequential, but of course they're very insignificant. But the top four, of course, must be prioritized in any kind of instruction that you're talking about: applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. Don't think that creating is something which is, like a rarity. I don't agree with that point actually. Like, you see, when a child writes something on his own, it's a creation. He writes a letter, it's a creation. He writes a poem, it's a creation. He builds a story, it's a creation. So whenever the child is coming out with a product of the language he has learned, it's construed as a creative product. And the creative skills are the most important of the 21st century skills. We know that in 21st century skills, we have 4 C's. Okay, and critical thinking, creative thinking, collaboration, and communication. These 4 are so essential in 21st century. If any student has to be employable, and you are developing him to be ready for the field work in any domain, and what is essential is that you should build these 4 C's. Okay, critical thinking, creative thinking, communication, and collaborative work. But I tell you, English teachers have got so much to do with all the 4, because communication, particularly what we're talking about as a 21st century skill, is perhaps nurtured in an English classroom, in a language classroom for that matter. And similarly, the critical thinking, creativity is the domain for a language teacher, of course. Very predominantly, the teacher's presence in the class is so conspicuous when she or he is building the communication skills, okay, giving them opportunities. Okay, giving the students opportunities is perhaps one of the finest things a teacher can do in a classroom. So similarly, you are building communication, you are working in teams, in tandem, and you are talking about the collaboration there, and creative thinking, as I told, that any product which was non-existent earlier, and you're designing, and that is your creative products. So many times it so happens in international schools, they don't memorize a story and put it in the exam. In the examination, probably they build a story, and given a few hints, of course, they write a poem. That's a creation. It was non-existent earlier, like they create a poem. And therefore, it should be understood, of course, that the students do not write the same answers all the time. Different students' papers, they are different. You can't have only a single answer. So every student is an open-ended question. Many times, of course, it's not an objective type question where you have a single answer for everybody. And most of the language papers, when you look at them, of course, the answers are different, and they can reflect in their own way, and they present their opinion there. And it's an ideology that ultimately they are presenting, and therefore it can differ from student to student. And this kind of environment, of course, you should be familiar as a teacher of English. It's not that all the answers are the same. You can't just say one answer and this is the answer. Of course, there's no model answer like. Okay, and it's deleterious to the students, of course, if the teacher is not competent to think of higher order thinking skills. And therefore, as a teacher in an international school, it is essential for you to think of higher order thinking skills, all the more creating, and look for some kind of outcomes in the language. And a language, as of course, is all the time assessed based on the learning outcomes, of course, there. And therefore, outcome-based education, of course, is very pronounced there. And as a teacher of English, of course, I just would advise you to think of making as many as possible infographics. These days, like you have a small card, okay, very colorfully designed, and it focuses only on a particular point. Okay, it can be a grammatical point or a point in literature, or it can be anything related to your language teaching. But you are designing an infographic. It explains in a nutshell what it's all about. And that is important actually. Like, so you just design as a teacher of English as many infographics as possible, and it's a presentation, of course, in a very known for its brevity, and it shall have the clarity. At the same time, of course, it's so compact. It just completes the idea there. So it's a very comprehensive presentation of a simple idea. I just give you an example for this one. Say you want to teach about, say, a transitive verb, and you just design an infographic about it. Say what is it, and give a few examples, and let students have a small assessment there, how to identify the transitive verb there and all. So my point here is, as a teacher, you should be able to make as many infographics as possible. And I think I should tell you this point, of course, all the classes, particularly the language classes, are interactive in nature. You are at no point of time, of course, your presence is conspicuous, and rest of the students, of course, there's they're passive in nature. It is not possible. So all the students, suppose you ask a question and different students, they write on sticky notes, they come and post it somewhere. So you just go through them, you understand, of course, they just write and they just come there and they present it. You are talking about the ideas, and you are also talking about the writing skills, and you are also making it, and later you can discuss. Okay, so they are ready with their sticky notes, and they just come and post it there, and that's the class is very interactive. Of course, sometimes you just take their ideas into consideration, of course, when you do your brainstorming, and when they come, of course, after a break, you just make sure that there is ice breaking there, and again you just establish that interaction between them, and then you start your lesson. And sometimes you conduct a prognostic test, of course, a baseline test before you start a new lesson, whether you just check whether they are ready or not. And so these are all the terms, of course, which are normally used in a situation, and you must be familiar with all of them. As the next point I would tell you is that, their learning style. And some of the students, of course, they can listen and understand, and some of the students, they have to see something to understand. They're all visual learners. And in some cases, some students have to do something and learn, kinesthetic learners, you call them. If they're using their, limbs to a small extent, of course, that's a tactile learning. But if they're using the limbs very heavily, we call them kinesthetic learners, because they use the body parts and they learn. Okay, and therefore your lesson plan shall have a provision for all these things, auditory learners, visual learners, kinesthetic learners, and sometimes you can allow them to learn on their own by reading and writing. So you give them sometimes an essay and you ask them to reflect on that. You can give them a book and ask them to review the book. So what happens in such cases is that all these learning styles become redundant, and what becomes important is that they read and learn, read and write, and they come prepared, of course, after learning, and they review the books. And therefore a teacher's role is to know the learning styles of the students. It's the auditory learners, visual learners, kinesthetic learners, not tactile, remember that, kinesthetic learners, at the same time, of course, reading and writing mode. Okay, and there are many active learning strategies. When I say active learning strategies, I just want to use 3 words. I want to explain them, tools, techniques, and strategies. Okay, tools, techniques, and strategies. These are different words. Okay, they have different meaning altogether. If to know whether the students have understood or not, of course, if I conduct a quiz, then quiz is a technique, and the questions I'm using in quiz, they're called tools. And when I have to do it, this assessment is a strategy. Where to place this quiz, of course, in my instruction, where to accommodate, that is my strategy. So whenever I am doing an assessment, of course, I have all the 3. Okay, tools, techniques, and strategies. My point here is, when they are learning, not for assessment, when they are learning, when the instruction is in progress, of course, and I can use my icebreakers, I can use my case studies, I can use my brainstorming, I can use my think, pair, share, because I take 2 students, of course, they think something and they come out, of course, they share, exchange their ideas, sometimes they write, pair, share, they write what they feel, and later they share with others, and we pair them up, of course, and numbered heads together, and a round table, background knowledge probe, question and answer page, and all that, corners, and generating questions, 1-minute papers. These are all you can just Google and find out the active learning strategies. These are very, very important, actually, and the most important point here I want to tell you, it's all the time we are thinking that there is a question and students have to probe to get the answers, but in international schools there are answers and the questions are framed. And like the same answer you perhaps might get, and there can be a different question. They are all together, like so different questions emanate from the students, and answer being the same. And therefore we see a different kind of exercise, of course, where the language is used, and framing the questions can be your active learning strategy, of course, generating the questions. Sometimes there is something called a jigsaw. Sometimes you have a first word, last word, and you have a circle map, you have a 2 stars and a wish head, actually. And there is something called a cache. We call it cognitive, effective, surprise, and help. So these are all the active learning strategies. There are about 70 to 80 of them for a language teacher, and I expect every teacher to be familiar with conducting it, not that what it is, because the same technique you can use an active learning strategy, okay, and let us say questions, insights, and connections. So it's a QIC, it's a strategy. So this you use several times. Okay, questions, ideas, or insights and connections, you are using this strategy in several conditions, like, and therefore it's not just the technique, okay, it's not that this strategy. The point is, can you administer it, of course, as frequently as possible. Suddenly you should say what is right there, what is appropriate there, a learning strategy. And that is very, very important, actually. Like, okay, so when you feel that your methods are not working, sometimes you have to change. There must be a seamless transition. So you think of one particular method and you feel that no, it's not working, and quickly you should be able to have a seamless transition to some other method or strategy. And these days, I tell you, you are a contemporary teacher, you're a 21st century teacher, and therefore you can't definitely use the methods you used when you were learning, okay. And certainly, of course, it is it's I don't know, like, I don't say it's obsolete, and certainly, of course, it's I can say it's rustic, it's the archaic methods you're using, and therefore time now for you to check whether your methods are contemporary or not. Are they appropriate for the 21st century? Probably, like, when we were learning, we didn't use Google or Wikipedia. We were learning the language, and today people are learning using podcasts, okay, listening games, mixer groups, and chatting softwares and text readers, grammar checks, and funny conversations, public speeches, and videos with the titles, and videos with music and voiceovers. And therefore my point is, are we comfortable with all these new methods of teaching English? Can we employ so much of technology there so that the learning can be effective? Like, okay, it's not a dry reading in the class and writing on the chalkboard and all that, okay, and you have to obliterate all of them. But don't think the technology we are using, there's any kind of conundrum, no confusion. So you should be able to use all kinds of the technological tools, of course, which are available, and so that even the apps and all, many apps, so that the students learn the language in a most modern way. And therefore the methods we are employing, of course, they should be contemporary, and they should be 21st century methods, and you should be able to adapt them in an environment, and that is the crux of the story, okay. And there is one proverb, let us say, that the birds of same feather flock together. And if you ask Shashi Tharoor, he says members of an avian species of identical plumage, and they congregate. See, the language differs depending on the person, of course, who's using that. And this kind of versatility, when you're talking about, I just want to give you an example for this. And I get a paper, I just want to say no for it. I don't want to accept that what was proposed. So I can simply say, no, I don't accept it. But when you look at some of the students, of course, they say it in a different way, particularly when the students they come from different ethnic cultures. There's one student who says, I don't have any reason to say yes for this. Instead of saying a simple no, he is telling, I don't have any reason to say yes for this. So this is the language they are using. When they frequently come across, of course, when they read, when they listen to people, when the teachers are setting a benchmark, and definitely the language, of course, is something different. You can't expect a direct answer, a simple answer and all that. The language can be more complicated. Probably it makes sense there. It's more sensible than the sentence what you're talking about. And therefore, what is essential is that you have to think of setting benchmark standards in the speaking skills, writing skills, and the way they understand, of course, the listening comprehension, and also when they are writing. Okay, all the skills, of course, you are trying to build, and that's something that's very, very interesting there. And I expect all the teachers to get familiar with all these active learning strategies and make sure that you set benchmark standards in the language, and certainly, of course, you stand a fair chance in getting into an international school to teach English as a second language or as a first language. Thank you so much.